The sign was nailed to the door on a Tuesday morning in early October. Yellow paper, black letters, condemned, unsafe for occupancy or operation. Below that, the county seal and a signature nobody in Millhaven had ever questioned before. A small crowd gathered on the gravel lot before noon, not out of grief, more out of curiosity, the way people gather to watch something get torn down. Some of them had coffee. Some of them had already decided what they thought, and most of them agreed on one thing: it was about time. The Hargrove elevator had been standing on the edge of town since 1951. 40 feet of poured concrete and corrugated steel, grain dust baked into every seam, a bucket conveyor that groaned when the wind hit it right, and a set of pneumatic augers that hadn't run at full capacity in over a decade. To most people driving past on County Road 7, it looked like something the county should have dealt with years ago. An eyesore, a liability, a relic from a time when men like Eldon Hargrove still mattered. But Eldon wasn't there that Tuesday. He was out back behind the main bin, checking something the county inspector hadn't bothered to look at. He had a small flashlight in one hand and a notepad in the other. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't calling anyone. He was taking notes. That's the kind of man Eldon was. 71 years old, retired from commercial milling for 6 years, wide through the shoulders, slow through the joints, and quieter now than he used to be. His father had built that elevator with a partner in the summer of 1951, pouring the foundation themselves over 3 weekends while a heat wave rolled across the valley. Eldon had worked inside it from the time he was 12, first sweeping grain dust off the scale platform, then operating the leg, then managing the whole floor through the wheat years of the 70s, when that elevator ran 20 hours a day during harvest, and you could smell the milled grain 2 miles downwind on a still morning. He knew every sound that building made, and that's exactly why the condemned notice had not alarmed him the way it had alarmed everyone else. The county inspector's report cited 5 violations: structural fatigue in the upper bin casing, corroded anchor bolts at the base, electrical systems out of compliance with current code, fire suppression rated for 1987 specifications, not current ones, and, the one that carried the most weight in the report, an engineering assessment from a firm in the city that had declared the bucket conveyor mechanically unsound and not safely operable. The firm's name was Colton Marsh Infrastructure Solutions. They had been in business for 11 years. They had assessed 43 grain facilities in the region. They charged a flat rate of $4,000 for a structural assessment. Their report on the Hargrove elevator was 14 pages long, contained 6 photographs, and recommended immediate decommissioning. None of the men from Colton Marsh had ever run a grain elevator. Eldon read their report twice. He underlined 3 passages. He wrote one note in the margin: wrong assumption on load-bearing. See 1974 retrofit documentation. And then he set it on the kitchen table and went to bed at his regular time, which was 9:15. What nobody watching from that gravel lot understood was this: Eldon Hargrove had spent the previous 4 months quietly preparing for exactly this moment, not because he predicted the condemnation notice, but because he had been watching the harvest season build across the valley all summer, and he had seen what was coming before anyone else had. The Caldwell Co-op, the only other grain handling facility within 40 miles, had expanded too fast the year before. New bins, new contracts, new overhead they hadn't finished paying for. By August, word had begun moving through the coffee shops and feed stores the way word always moves in farm country, not in announcements, but in pauses, in things men didn't say. The Caldwell operation was stretched thin. If the fall harvest came in heavy, they would not have capacity for everyone, and the harvest was coming in heavy. Eldon had checked the soil moisture reports. He had talked to 3 different producers east of town who were already running yield estimates above projections. He had driven the county roads in July and watched the field color with his own eyes. He understood what a heavy harvest meant for a valley with only one functioning elevator. So he had quietly done what he always did when a problem needed solving. He went to work. The electrical systems were the first thing. He had an electrician from the next county over, a man named Bert Kessel, who had done work on agricultural buildings for 30 years, come out and go through the entire panel. Bert found 3 legitimate issues and one that was a matter of interpretation in the code language. He fixed all 4. Total cost, $1,800. Documented, permitted, signed. The fire suppression was next. Eldon called the manufacturer's regional rep directly, a thing the Colton Marsh team apparently had not done. The rep confirmed that the existing system, while older, met current agricultural storage exemptions under state fire code for facilities under a certain bushel capacity, a threshold the Hargrove elevator sat just below. Eldon got that in writing. The anchor bolts were the one item that required a third party. He hired a local contractor, not a city firm, to inspect and replace 4 of the 12 base anchors that showed surface corrosion. The other 8 were sound. The contractor put his name on a certification stating as much. Eldon filed it with the county building department on a Wednesday afternoon and paid the $8 filing fee at the front window without saying a word to anyone about what it was for. What remained was the bucket conveyor, the piece the Colton Marsh report had called mechanically unsound. That assessment had been based on a visual inspection. The assessors had looked at the external housing, noted wear on 2 of the visible belt guides, observed that the drive motor had not been run in some time, and concluded that the system was unsafe to operate without full rebuild or replacement. A full rebuild, they estimated, would cost between $32,000 and $40,000. Replacement of the conveyor system entirely would run higher. What they had not done was open the leg housing and inspect the belt itself. They had not checked the motor windings. They had not looked at the maintenance log, which Eldon kept in a gray binder on a shelf in the scale office, a log that showed every service performed on that conveyor going back to 1988, the last time the belt had been replaced, and through every harvest season since. The belt was a specific type, a polyester carcass elevator belt with vulcanized splices, rated for continuous operation in grain service. It had been installed in 1988 by Eldon himself, with the help of his father, who was still alive and sharp that summer, who had stood at the bottom of the leg and called up instructions while Eldon threaded the belt through the housing above him. A good belt, properly maintained, could last 40 years in the right conditions. The conditions inside a sealed concrete elevator, dry, away from UV, with regular tension checks and biannual cleaning, were as right as you could get. Eldon knew the belt was sound. He had inspected it himself in June. He had documented it. And he had one other thing that the Colton Marsh assessors had not known to look for: the original factory specification sheet for that belt, stamped and dated from the manufacturer, showing a rated service life of 45 years at normal grain volumes. He had kept it in a manila envelope since the day it was installed. His father had told him to. "You keep the paperwork," his father had said. "Machines don't argue. Paperwork argues for them." On the 22nd of October, 11 days after the condemnation notice appeared, an Eldon Hargrove submitted a formal response to the county building department. It was 31 pages. It included the electrical certification from Bert Kessel, the fire suppression manufacturer letter, the anchor bolt replacement certification, the belt factory specification, the maintenance log, a corrected load-bearing calculation referencing the 1974 structural retrofit that Colton Marsh had not accounted for, and a brief cover letter that he had typed himself at his kitchen table. The cover letter was 4 sentences long. The county referred the response to a second engineering review. That reviewer, a retired agricultural engineer from the state university system who had spent 30 years assessing grain handling infrastructure, took 3 days to go through Eldon's documentation. On the 4th day, he called the county office and said something to the effect that the original condemnation was based on incomplete information and that the facility, once the already completed repairs were verified on site, should be cleared for operation. The verification inspection happened on a Friday morning in early November. Eldon met the inspector at the gate. He walked him through every item. He didn't talk much. He let the documentation speak. By 2 in the afternoon, the condemned notice came down. By 4 o'clock that same day, Eldon had already made 2 phone calls to producers east of town who had been told by the Caldwell Co-op that there was no room for their late harvest loads. He quoted them his storage rate. They said yes before he finished the sentence. The elevator ran for 19 days straight that November. The bucket conveyor, the one a city engineering firm had called mechanically unsound, ran without a single interruption. The belt his father had told him to keep records on moved grain through that concrete tower the same way it had moved grain through every harvest since 1988. No failures, no slowdowns, no drama. The town was quiet about it, the way towns go quiet when they realize they misjudged something. Nobody issued a public apology. Nobody put up a news sign. The Colton Marsh report was quietly filed away somewhere. Eldon didn't ask for acknowledgement. He didn't post about it. He didn't call the local paper. He just ran the elevator. And every morning, when he walked from his truck to the scale office door, past the faded spot on the concrete where the yellow condemn notice had been nailed, he didn't look at it with satisfaction. He didn't think about what he had proven or who he had proven it to. He thought about his father standing at the bottom of that leg housing in 1988, calling up instructions in the summer heat, telling him to thread the belt slowly and keep the tension even. You keep the paperwork. Machines don't argue. Paperwork argues for them. Some men spend their whole lives trying to be heard. Eldon Hargrove had learned something different, that you don't have to be heard if the work speaks clearly enough, that old things don't stop being valuable just because the crowd stops paying attention, that patience isn't weakness, that quiet isn't surrender. The elevator was still standing at the edge of town. The grain was still moving, and the man who had known it would had known it all along, not because he was lucky and not because he was stubborn, but because he had paid attention when it mattered, kept records when no one was watching, and trusted what he had learned from a man who built something meant to last. Some things take 40 years to prove what they were worth, and some men already knew